Clara Donovan sat in the darkened living room of her Manhattan penthouse, her hand resting protectively on the curve of her belly. 6 months pregnant, she should have felt the joy of a new life growing inside her. Instead, a heaviness pressed down on her chest, suffocating her with every breath. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight, but her husband, Richard Donovan, had not come home. He hadn't called, he hadn't texted, and deep down, Clara knew exactly where he was. Rumors had reached her weeks ago. Whispers at charity events, sympathetic glances from women she once considered friends. Richard was seen everywhere, with Sabrina Cole, a woman nearly 10 years younger, glamorous, bold, and ruthless. Clara had wanted to believe it was nothing more than cruel gossip. She had wanted to believe her husband was still the man who once swore he would never let her cry alone. But that illusion had shattered earlier that evening. She had called Richard, her voice trembling, asking when he would be home. His reply was cold and clipped. "I'll be late. Don't wait up." And then the sound of laughter in the background, feminine laughter, careless and cruel, cut straight through her heart. Clara's hands shook as she placed the phone back on the table. For a long moment, she sat frozen, staring at the empty seat across from her. That chair once belonged to a man who used to bring her roses after a long day, who used to kiss her forehead and whisper about the future they would build together. Now, it belonged to a ghost of that man, someone who no longer looked at her the way he once did. The tears came slowly at first, then all at once, hot and unrelenting. Clara pressed her palms to her face, willing herself not to sob too loudly. The baby stirred within her, a gentle reminder that she wasn't alone, even in this silence. She lowered her hands to her stomach, whispering, "I'm sorry, my love. I'm so sorry you have to feel this pain with me." Across town, Richard's night was very different. In a luxury hotel suite, glasses clinked and laughter spilled into the air. Sabrina draped herself over him, wearing a dress that sparkled like starlight. She whispered promises in his ear, promises of excitement, freedom, and a life without responsibility. Richard, blinded by her beauty and the thrill of forbidden pleasure, forgot, or chose to forget, that his pregnant wife sat at home, waiting, breaking. Back in the penthouse, Clara rose to her feet slowly. Every movement carried the weight of exhaustion. She walked toward the window, gazing out at the city skyline. New York glittered as if mocking her, every light a reminder of the life she thought she had built with Richard. In her reflection, she barely recognized herself. Dark circles under her eyes, lips trembling, shoulders heavy with sorrow. But beneath that sorrow, something else stirred. A quiet strength. A voice within her whispering that this could not be the end of her story. She reached for the small wooden box tucked away in a drawer. Inside were letters she had once written to Richard. Love notes, anniversary cards, reminders of a time when they had been inseparable. With trembling fingers, she placed the letters into a neat pile and closed the lid. She knew then that those memories belonged to the past. Clara walked to her desk. She pulled out a crisp white sheet of paper and picked up a pen. For a long moment, she simply stared at it. The silence of the room pressed around her, broken only by the faint hum of the city below. Then, slowly, she began to write. Her words were not filled with anger. They were not desperate pleas for him to return. They were quiet, steady, and final. She wrote of betrayal, she wrote of disappointment, and she wrote of freedom, for herself and for the child she carried. Each stroke of the pen felt like releasing a chain that had bound her heart for too long. By the time she set the pen down, tears blurred her vision, but her hand no longer trembled. She folded the paper carefully, slipped it into an envelope, and sealed it with a firm press. On the front, she wrote one word. She leaned back in her chair, exhaustion washing over her. But for the first time in months, there was also a flicker of calm. She had made her decision. She would not beg. She would not fight for a man who had already chosen another. She would walk away, not with bitterness, but with dignity. At that very moment, Richard was pouring champagne into Sabrina's glass, telling her she was the only woman who truly understood him. He didn't know that at home, Clara was preparing the first step of her silent departure. He didn't know that the woman he thought too gentle, too fragile to stand on her own, was already stronger than he could imagine. As the night grew deeper, Clara placed the envelope on the table, where Richard couldn't miss it. She turned off the lights, leaving the apartment cloaked in darkness. She walked toward her bedroom, her hand resting again on her belly. "Everything will change," she whispered softly. "Not because of him, but because of us." The baby kicked, as if in response. Clara allowed herself the faintest of smiles, though her eyes were still wet with tears. She climbed into bed, pulling the covers close, and closed her eyes. For the first time, she did not wait for the sound of keys turning in the lock. She no longer cared when Richard would come home, or if he came home at all. The hook of the story was set. A woman betrayed, broken, but unbending. A mistress basking in her temporary victory. And a husband blind to the storm he had unleashed. The runway of fate was waiting, and when the jet engines roared, lives would be changed forever. The morning light filtered weakly through the penthouse curtains, painting the room in shades of gray. Clara Donovan stirred awake, her hand instinctively reaching for the other side of the bed. Empty. The sheets were cold, untouched, a silent confirmation that Richard had never come home. Her chest tightened. She had half hoped, against all reason, that she would wake to find him there, perhaps contrite, perhaps pretending to care. But there was no apology waiting for her, no warm presence. Only silence. Clara sat up slowly, brushing her tangled hair back with a trembling hand. The events of the previous night rushed back with brutal clarity. The phone call, the laughter in the background, the letter she had sealed with quiet determination. For a moment, she considered tearing it apart, pretending none of this was happening. But then the baby shifted inside her, a soft reminder that denial was no longer an option. She rose and moved toward the kitchen, her bare feet dragging across the polished floor. The air smelled faintly of the roses Richard had bought weeks ago, now withered in their vase, petals curling inward like broken promises. She poured herself a glass of water, but her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Clara's heart leapt, hoping for a message from Richard. But it wasn't him. It was her doctor's office, reminding her of her prenatal appointment scheduled for later that morning. She stared at the notification, her throat tightening. She had begged Richard to come with her to these appointments. Each time, he had promised. Each time, he had failed. Today would be no different. Clara pressed her lips together, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. "It's okay," she whispered to herself, trying to sound convincing. "You'll handle it. You always do." At the clinic, the waiting room buzzed with hushed conversations and the occasional laugh of expectant couples. Clara sat alone, clutching her purse against her chest. Across from her, a young husband rubbed his wife's back while she leaned on his shoulder, both smiling as they looked at their ultrasound photos. Clara's gaze dropped to the floor. When her name was called, she forced herself to stand, smoothing her dress over her growing belly. The nurse greeted her kindly, leading her into the exam room. Clara lay back on the table, her heart pounding. The doctor entered, cheerful and warm, but his eyes softened when he glanced at the empty chair beside her. "Is your husband not joining us today?" he asked gently. Clara's throat constricted. She wanted to lie, to say Richard was traveling or caught in a meeting. Instead, she swallowed hard and whispered, "No, he couldn't make it." The doctor gave her a sympathetic nod but didn't press further. He applied the gel and pressed the wand against her abdomen. Within moments, the sound of a steady, rapid heartbeat filled the room. Clara closed her eyes, tears sliding down her temples. The baby's heartbeat was strong, defiant, alive. For that moment, nothing else mattered. Not Richard, not Sabrina, not the whispers and betrayals, just the sound of her child's life echoing in the room. She let the tears flow silently, her lips trembling as she whispered, "You're all I need." After the appointment, Clara stepped into the crisp morning air. The city bustled around her, people rushing to work, cabs honking, life moving forward as if her world hadn't just collapsed. She stood on the sidewalk, clutching the ultrasound photo the doctor had handed her. The tiny outline of her baby stared back at her, fragile yet unyielding. She wanted to call someone, to hear a voice that would anchor her. But who? Her parents had passed years ago. Friends had drifted away, intimidated by her wealthy lifestyle, or too eager to gossip about Richard's affair. She had never felt more alone. Clara tucked the photo into her purse and hailed a cab. As she slid into the back seat, She pressed her forehead against the glass, watching the city blur past. Everywhere she looked, she saw couples holding hands, laughter spilling onto the sidewalks, life reminding her of everything she had lost. When she arrived back at the penthouse, the silence inside greeted her like an unwelcome guest. The envelope still sat on the table, untouched, its presence heavy in the room. Clara sank onto the couch, staring at it. She imagined Richard walking in, his eyes catching on the envelope. Would he laugh at her attempt at finality? Would he even care? The thought made her stomach twist. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Richard. Her breath caught as she read the message. Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. That was it. No question about her appointment. No concern for her or the baby. Nothing. Clara let out a bitter laugh, though it quickly turned into a sob. She pressed her hands against her face, rocking slightly. The pain cut deeper than any physical wound. It wasn't just the betrayal of a husband. It was the betrayal of a partner, a father, a man who had promised to build a family with her and was now dismantling it piece by piece. Later that evening, she tried to distract herself by cooking dinner. She set the table for two out of habit, but halfway through the meal, she realized the absurdity. She shoved the second plate aside and forced herself to eat, though every bite tasted like ashes. The baby kicked again, stronger this time. Clara placed her hand on her belly, her tears falling into her food. Don't worry, she whispered. I'll make sure you never feel unwanted. I'll be enough for you, even if he isn't. As night fell, Clara walked back to the living room. She picked up the envelope, holding it tightly in her hands. She traced the letters of Richard's name on the front, her chest tightening. For a moment, she almost tore it open, desperate to cling to the illusion of the life she once had. But then she remembered the doctor's words. The baby is strong. You're doing well. Just take care of yourself. She closed her eyes, inhaling shakily. Take care of yourself, she whispered. That's what I need to do. Clara placed the envelope back on the table, this time with a sense of finality. She turned off the lights, letting the penthouse sink into darkness. In the stillness, she made herself a silent vow. She would no longer beg for Richard's attention. She would no longer measure her worth by his neglect. From this moment forward, she would live for herself and her child. It wasn't strength born out of choice, it was survival. But in that survival, Clara felt the faintest flicker of power. And though Richard didn't know it yet, the woman he thought he could discard was already rising. The days that followed felt like a blur to Clara Donovan. She went through the motions of life, eating, sleeping, attending her doctor's appointments, but inside, she was hollow. Each night, the penthouse grew colder, more silent, as Richard's absences stretched longer. He rarely called anymore. When he did, his words were sharp, perfunctory. The man she had once loved now spoke to her as though she were nothing more than an inconvenience. But the world outside did not stop. Richard Donovan was not only her husband, he was a well-known figure in New York society, a man admired for his business acumen and envied for his wealth. And Clara, whether she liked it or not, was still his wife. Invitations to charity galas, fundraisers, and social events continued to pour in. She had ignored them for weeks, too tired to put on a facade. Yet one invitation was impossible to refuse: the annual Winter Benefit Gala, hosted by the Donovan Foundation itself. For years, Clara had helped organize the gala, pouring her heart into every detail. It was supposed to be a celebration of generosity, of hope. This year, however, she knew it would be different. She debated not attending, but how could she not? It was her name, too, etched into the history of the foundation. And deep down, perhaps, she hoped Richard would at least stand beside her, if only for appearances. The night of the gala arrived, bitterly cold. Clara dressed carefully, slipping into a long, flowing gown of midnight blue that stretched over her rounded belly. She pinned her hair into an elegant twist, applied just enough makeup to hide the exhaustion etched into her features, and slipped on a pair of heels. She glanced at her reflection in the mirror. For a moment, she didn't see a broken woman. She saw dignity, resilience. Maybe that would be enough. Her car pulled up to the Grand Hotel ballroom, already buzzing with life. Flashing cameras lit up the night as paparazzi swarmed the red carpet. Clara stepped out, holding her clutch tightly, trying to ignore the murmurs around her. The cameras turned briefly toward her, but she could feel it. The curiosity, the pity. She straightened her spine, forcing a small smile. Inside, the ballroom glittered with chandeliers and champagne flutes, the air heavy with perfume and polished laughter. Clara scanned the crowd, searching for Richard. And then she saw him. He entered with Sabrina on his arm. Clara's heart clenched. Sabrina was dazzling in a crimson gown, her hand possessively looped through Richard's. He looked proud, as though parading her was an accomplishment, not a scandal. The room shifted as whispers spread like wildfire. Guests turned to watch, some hiding their smirks behind champagne glasses, others exchanging knowing glances. Clara froze, her feet rooted to the floor. For a moment she couldn't breathe. She felt every pair of eyes flicking between her and the woman clinging to her husband. Her cheeks burned, her palms clammy. "Clara." A woman's voice broke through the haze. It was Mrs. Harrington, an old socialite with a penchant for gossip. Her tone was sickly sweet, dripping with false sympathy. "Darling, you look radiant, but I must say Richard seems quite taken tonight, doesn't he?" Her eyes flicked pointedly toward Sabrina, who leaned in closer to Richard, whispering something that made him laugh. Clara forced a polite nod, though her stomach churned. She excused herself quickly, moving toward the far corner of the room. But no matter where she stood, she couldn't escape. Everywhere she turned, she heard them, fragments of hushed conversations. "She still showed up? Poor thing. Look at Sabrina, she practically glows. Richard doesn't even care who sees. Bold, isn't it?" Clara pressed her back against the wall, clutching her clutch so tightly her knuckles whitened. Her vision blurred with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of them. And then came the final blow. Richard raised a glass for a toast, the spotlight catching him and Sabrina in its glow. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he declared, his voice confident, commanding. "This foundation means the world to me, and I couldn't do it without the support of those closest to me." He glanced at Sabrina, his lips curling into a smile. "To those who truly understand me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Clara's breath hitched. He hadn't even looked in her direction. Not once. She felt her knees weaken, her heart pounding so violently she feared she might collapse. She turned quickly, making her way toward the exit, desperate to escape before the tears betrayed her. But as she reached the doorway, her phone buzzed. It was Richard. Confused, she opened the message. Her blood ran cold as she read the words, "Smile and stay put. Don't embarrass me." Clara stopped in her tracks, her hands trembling. Smile and stay put. As though she were nothing more than a prop, a placeholder for appearances. The humiliation was complete. Not only had Richard paraded his mistress in front of everyone, but he still expected her compliance. He wanted her to swallow the pain, to play her part in his carefully crafted image. Clara lifted her head slowly, tears threatening to spill. For a moment, she almost obeyed. Almost. But then she remembered the sound of her baby's heartbeat echoing in the doctor's office. She remembered the vow she had made to herself in the silence of the penthouse. She wiped her tears, squared her shoulders, and walked out of the ballroom without looking back. The whispers followed her, but she didn't care anymore. If this was humiliation, she would wear it. If this was Richard's idea of control, she would take it back, because something inside her had shifted. She realized then that she had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The cold air of that winter night bit into Clara Donovan's cheeks as she left the gala. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble steps, each step heavier than the last. The humiliation still burned in her chest like fire. The sight of Richard laughing with Sabrina under the chandeliers, the sting of his message commanding her to smile and stay put, all of it circled in her mind like a cruel refrain. By the time she reached the street, her vision was blurred. The doorman hailed a cab for her, but she waved it off. "I'll walk," she murmured, though her voice shook. She needed air. She needed space. Anything to escape the suffocating memory of that ballroom. Snow flurries drifted in the air as she walked along Fifth Avenue, her hand resting against her belly. Her body ached, her breath shallow, but she pressed forward. She couldn't let herself break down here, not in front of strangers, not where cameras might still be watching. She ducked into a quieter side street, her heels slipping slightly on the icy pavement. But the world wouldn't give her peace. As she passed a brightly lit restaurant, the laughter from inside caught her attention. She turned her head and froze. Through the glass windows, she saw them. Richard and Sabrina, sitting close together at a table near the front, glasses of wine raised, his hand resting on hers. Her stomach twisted violently. They hadn't even waited. He hadn't even pretended to go home after the gala. The moment the speeches ended, he had whisked Sabrina away, as though Clara didn't exist at all. Clara's chest tightened, her throat constricting. She couldn't breathe. The baby shifted inside her, restless, and she stumbled back from the window. Her pulse raced, panic flooding her body. A man coming down the sidewalk reached out quickly. "Hey, are you okay?" Clara shook her head, her knees buckling beneath her. The world tilted. The snow, the lights, the sound of traffic blurring together. She tried to speak, but her lips formed only a whisper. "The baby." Then everything went dark. When Clara opened her eyes again, she was no longer outside. She was lying on a soft leather seat, the faint smell of cologne surrounding her. A low hum of an engine vibrated beneath her. Slowly her vision cleared, and she realized she was inside a car, a sleek black sedan gliding through the city streets. Panic surged. She pushed herself up weakly. "Where am I?" "Easy," a deep voice said from beside her. "You fainted. I couldn't leave you on the sidewalk like that." She turned her head. A man sat next to her, tall and broad-shouldered, his expression calm yet concerned. His tailored coat and polished shoes spoke of wealth, but it was the steadiness in his eyes that struck her. "I'm Alexander Graves," he continued. "I was coming out of the restaurant when I saw you collapse. You and your child needed help." Clara's lips parted in shock. She had heard the name before, Alexander Graves, the reclusive billionaire whose empire spanned shipping, finance, and real estate. A man rarely seen in public, spoken of in hushed tones at social gatherings. And now here he was, sitting beside her. "You're safe," he assured her. "I'm taking you to the hospital to make sure everything is all right." Her instinct was to protest, to insist she could handle it. But her body betrayed her, too weak, too shaken. She nodded faintly, one hand pressing protectively to her stomach. At the hospital, Clara lay on the bed while nurses checked her vitals. The rhythmic thump of her baby's heartbeat filled the room, steady and strong. Relief washed over her, tears springing to her eyes. The child was safe. For now. Alexander stood quietly in the corner, his tall frame commanding yet unobtrusive. He waited until the doctor left before stepping closer. "You scared everyone out there," he said gently. "Do you have someone I should call? Family?" Clara shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, just my husband, but—" She trailed off, unable to finish. Alexander studied her for a moment, his jaw tightening. He didn't press, but his eyes flicked to the absence of a wedding ring on her hand. She still wore it, but it hung loose, as though even the metal was ready to fall away. "You don't have to explain," he said finally. "But I need you to understand, pushing yourself like this isn't safe. Not for you, not for the baby." Clara looked away, shame flooding her. "I didn't mean to. I just—" Her voice broke. "I saw him. With her. Right there, as if I didn't matter." Alexander's gaze softened. He didn't speak empty platitudes, didn't tell her to be strong. He simply said, "Then you deserve better." The simplicity of his words cut deeper than any sympathy she had received before. For months, she had swallowed her pain, convinced herself she was too weak, too fragile to survive without Richard. But hearing it spoken so plainly, that she deserved better, sent a shiver through her. After the doctor discharged her, Alexander offered to take her home. Clara hesitated, but exhaustion left her little choice. As the car glided through the city once again, silence filled the space between them. Finally, she spoke. "Why did you help me? You don't even know me." Alexander glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Let's just say I knew your father once. He was a man I respected deeply. He spoke of his daughter with pride. When I saw you tonight, I couldn't turn away." Clara's breath caught. Memories of her late father rushed back, the way he had always protected her, the way he had believed in her even when she doubted herself. Her throat tightened, tears pricking her eyes. "You remind me of him," Alexander added quietly. "Strong, even when you don't feel it." Clara turned her face toward the window, hiding the tears sliding down her cheeks. She didn't feel strong. She felt broken, abandoned. But maybe, just maybe, there was a strength left in her that even she couldn't see. When they reached the penthouse, Alexander stepped out and opened her door. Clara thanked him softly. her voice barely audible. He didn't press for details, didn't pry into her pain. He simply said, "Take care of yourself, and if you ever need help, real help, you know where to find me." She nodded, clutching her coat tighter around her. As the car pulled away, she stood in the cold night, staring up at the glittering city skyline. For the first time, she realized she wasn't as alone as she thought. The collapse had nearly broken her, but it had also revealed something unexpected. Not all allies came from the past, and not all strangers were indifferent. Sometimes, salvation appeared where you least expected it. And while Richard and Sabrina basked in their shallow triumph, Clara had found something far more valuable. An unexpected hand reaching into the darkness, reminding her that her story wasn't over yet. The next morning, Clara woke with a heaviness in her chest, but also with the lingering echo of Alexander Graves's words, "You deserve better." They repeated in her mind as she moved through the penthouse, tidying up a space that felt less like a home and more like a gilded prison. The envelope with Richard's name still sat on the table, untouched, daring her to finally deliver the truth. She tried to focus on the day ahead, but her body still ached from the collapse. The memory of fainting on the sidewalk, the humiliation of being seen so broken, replayed in her mind. And yet, there had been something different this time. Someone had been there. Not to gossip, not to judge, but to help. Clara told herself she wouldn't see Alexander again. Men like him didn't linger. They helped, then disappeared. But as if summoned by her thoughts, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Donovan?" The deep, steady voice made her pause. "It's Alexander. I just wanted to make sure you and the baby are all right." Her throat tightened. No one had asked her that in months. Not Richard, not anyone. She found herself whispering, "We're fine. Thank you." "I'm glad," he said. "But forgive me for being blunt. You don't sound fine. Would you join me for lunch? Neutral ground. No expectations, just conversation." Clara hesitated. Every instinct told her to retreat, to avoid more whispers, more judgment. But something inside nudged her forward. She agreed, quietly, almost against her own will. The restaurant Alexander chose was discreet, a place where power brokers met in private booths, away from the eyes of paparazzi. Clara arrived cautiously, wearing a simple coat over her dress, her hair pulled back. She half expected stares, but the staff ushered her in smoothly, respectful and silent. Alexander was already seated, a cup of coffee before him. He rose when she entered, his movements calm, deliberate. Unlike Richard, who always seemed to perform for an audience, Alexander carried himself with an ease that didn't need proving. "Clara," he said warmly, "thank you for coming." She nodded, slipping into the seat across from him. For a moment silence hung between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. "I should apologize," she began. "For last night, you didn't have to get involved." His gaze held hers, steady and firm. "If I hadn't, you might not be sitting here today. That's not something I regret." Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked down, fiddling with the edge of her napkin. Alexander leaned back slightly. "I don't want to pry, but I can see what's happening. You don't have to tell me the details. It's written in your eyes, Clara. Pain, betrayal, fear, and still, you carry yourself with dignity. That takes strength." Clara's composure cracked. She pressed her hand against her mouth, trying to stifle the tears welling up. "I don't feel strong," she whispered. "I feel abandoned, forgotten. I don't even recognize the man I married anymore." Alexander's expression softened. He didn't reach across the table, didn't make empty gestures. He simply listened. And that was more powerful than anything else. As lunch went on, Clara found herself speaking more than she expected. Not every detail, but enough. The nights Richard didn't come home, the humiliating gala, the loneliness of her doctor's visits. Alexander never interrupted, never dismissed her pain. When she finally fell silent, exhausted from the weight of her own words, he said quietly, "I knew your father. He helped me once, at a time when no one else would. He believed in people, even when the world saw nothing worth believing in. I see that same spirit in you." Clara blinked, startled. "You knew my father?" Alexander nodded. "He was a man of honor, and I'll tell you this. If he were here today, he wouldn't want you wasting another moment on someone who treats you as disposable. He'd want you to fight, not for him, not even for me, for yourself, for your child." The words hit her like a jolt. She remembered her father's laughter, his steady hands guiding hers as a child, his constant reassurance that she was capable of more than she realized. For the first time since his passing, she felt his presence again, through Alexander's reminder. They left the restaurant together, stepping into the brisk winter air. For a moment, Clara feared the cameras would find them, that tomorrow's headlines would be cruel and twisted. But no cameras came. The street was quiet, as if fate had granted her this moment of peace. Alexander stopped before his car, turning to her. "Clara, I won't tell you what to do. That's not my place. But if you decide to stand up to reclaim your life, I'll help you, whatever you need." Clara looked up at him, her heart thudding. She wanted to ask why. Why would a man like him care? But something in his eyes stopped her. It wasn't pity. It wasn't obligation. It was something quieter, steadier. Respect. "I don't know if I can," she admitted. "You already are," he replied simply. That night, Clara sat in the penthouse again, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the windows. But something had shifted. The envelope with Richard's name still sat on the table, but now it no longer looked like a symbol of despair. It looked like a weapon, one she could choose to use. She thought of Alexander's words, "I'll help you, whatever you need." She thought of her father. She thought of her child, growing stronger inside her with each day. For the first time in months, Clara didn't feel trapped. She felt possibility. Richard still hadn't come home. She didn't wait for him. She went to bed early, her hand resting on her belly, her heart strangely steady. Because somewhere out there, an unexpected ally had reminded her of something she had nearly forgotten. She was not powerless. And soon, Richard would learn that too. The days after her meeting with Alexander Graves passed in uneasy silence. Clara Donovan found herself lingering on his words, on the way he had looked at her. Not with pity, but with recognition. For the first time in months, she felt seen, yet the reality of her life with Richard still loomed large over her. Richard came home less and less. When he did, it was late at night, the smell of perfume clinging to him, his eyes avoiding hers. Clara stopped asking questions. Each silence between them was louder than any argument could have been. One evening, Clara sat at the dining table, staring at the untouched dinner she had prepared. The clock ticked past midnight. Still no sign of him. She rose slowly, her hand brushing her stomach. As she cleared the plates, she noticed a stack of unopened mail shoved haphazardly into a drawer. Something about the way it was hidden caught her attention. Curious, she pulled the envelopes out. Most were bank statements, neatly addressed to Richard. Clara hesitated. For years, she had trusted him with everything: finances, investments, the foundation. But trust felt like a stranger now. Her hands trembling, she opened one of the statements. Her breath caught. Large withdrawals, transfers to accounts she didn't recognize. Luxury expenses far beyond even Richard's usual extravagance. And then one detail that made her blood run cold. Payments made in Sabrina Cole's name. Rent for an upscale apartment. Designer jewelry. Even a car. Clara's heart pounded as she rifled through the rest of the statements. The pattern was unmistakable. Richard had been using their money, the fortune built partly from her inheritance, to fund Sabrina's lifestyle. Every dollar was another betrayal, another theft from the future Clara had planned for herself and her unborn child. Her chest tightened. For months, she had endured the humiliation of his affair, the loneliness of his absence. But this was worse. He hadn't only broken her heart, he had stolen from her, from their baby, from the very legacy her father had left behind. Clara sank into the chair, the statements scattered across the table like shards of glass. Tears blurred her vision. "How could you, Richard?" she whispered. The next day she met with her attorney, a woman she hadn't spoken to in years. Clara laid the documents on the desk, her hands shaking. The attorney's eyes widened as she flipped through them. "Clara, do you realize what this means? These aren't just personal expenses. Some of these transfers are linked to the foundation. If this comes out, Richard could be accused of misappropriating funds." Clara felt her stomach lurch. "You mean it's not just our money?" The attorney nodded gravely. "It's bigger than that. This could destroy his career, his reputation, but it could also drag your name down if you're not careful." Clara pressed a hand to her forehead, overwhelmed. She hadn't imagined it was this deep. She had come in seeking clarity, but instead she had uncovered a ticking bomb. "What should I do?" she asked softly. The attorney looked at her, eyes firm. You need to protect yourself and your child. If Richard is using your inheritance without consent, and if foundation money is involved, you cannot remain silent. Silence could make you complicit. Clara's chest rose and fell quickly. She thought of Alexander's words. Your father wouldn't want you wasting another moment on someone who treats you as disposable. He had been right. And now, she had proof that Richard had crossed a line that could not be forgiven. That evening, Clara returned to the penthouse, the weight of the documents heavy in her bag. Richard was already home for once, lounging on the sofa with a glass of scotch. Sabrina's laughter spilled through the speakerphone on the coffee table. Clara froze in the doorway, her hands tightening around the strap of her purse. Richard glanced at her briefly, then turned back to his drink. What? He asked flatly. Clara swallowed hard, her voice trembling but steady enough to cut through the room. I know what you've been doing, Richard. I saw the bank statements. His head snapped toward her, his eyes narrowing. For the first time in months, she had his full attention. You went through my things? He demanded. They weren't your things, Clara shot back, her voice breaking. They were ours. My father's money, my inheritance, used to pay for her. She spat the last word with venom. Do you have any idea what you've done? Richard rose from the sofa, his face darkening. Don't you dare accuse me. Everything I've built, everything you have, is because of me. If I choose to spend money, it's my right. Clara shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. No, Richard. It's not your right to steal from me. It's not your right to steal from our child. And if the board learns you've been funneling foundation money into your mistress's pockets, you'll lose everything. For a moment, a silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Then Richard's lips curled into a bitter sneer. You wouldn't dare. You don't have the strength. Clara lifted her chin, her body trembling but her gaze unflinching. Watch me. That night, long after Richard stormed out, Clara sat at the dining table again, the documents spread before her. She felt hollow, raw, but also strangely resolute. For the first time, she had power. Proof, and with it, a choice. As she gathered the papers into a folder, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. You don't know me, but I worked under Richard at the foundation. He's been covering things up. If you want the truth, meet me tomorrow. I'll bring evidence. Clara's pulse quickened. Who could this be? Why reach out to her now? But deep down, she already knew the answer. Richard's empire wasn't just built on betrayal, it was built on lies, and the cracks were beginning to show. That night, Clara stood at the window, looking out at the city lights. She rested her hand on her belly, whispering softly, I promised you I'd give you a better life. Maybe this is how it begins. The truth had been revealed, and it was far uglier than she had imagined. But within that ugliness, Clara felt the stirrings of something she hadn't known in a long time. Control. Richard thought she was weak. He thought she would stay silent. But the truth was no longer his to bury. It was hers to wield. Clara Donovan sat at the dining table late into the night, the folder of bank statements and financial documents spread before her. The city lights outside flickered against the glass windows, but inside the penthouse, the air was thick with tension. For months, Richard had made her feel powerless, invisible. But now she had proof that could shatter the carefully constructed empire he clung to. Her phone still displayed the anonymous message. I worked under Richard at the foundation. He's been covering things up. If you want the truth, meet me tomorrow. I'll bring evidence. Clara traced the words with her finger, her heart racing. A part of her wanted to delete the message, to retreat into the safety of silence. But another part, the part that had been awakened by Alexander's encouragement, by the sound of her child's steady heartbeat, refused to be ignored. This ends, she whispered to herself. The following morning, Clara dressed simply, pulling on a long coat and scarf that disguised her figure. She slipped out of the penthouse quietly, careful not to draw attention. Richard was gone, likely with Sabrina, lost in his own illusions of control. The cafe where she was told to meet was tucked away on a quiet street. Clara entered cautiously, her eyes scanning the room. At a corner table sat a young man in his early 30s, his nervous fingers tapping against a folder. When he saw her, he stood quickly. Mrs. Donovan? He asked in a low voice. Clara nodded, sliding into the seat across from him. You sent me the message. He glanced around before leaning closer. My name is Daniel Reed. I used to manage accounts for the Donovan Foundation. Richard fired me when I asked too many questions. Clara's pulse quickened. What kind of questions? Daniel opened the folder, pushing documents toward her. Questions about why large sums of money were being rerouted into shell companies, why expenses for Sabrina Cole were being written off as business development, why donors' money was disappearing. Clara's eyes scanned the papers, her hands trembling. The evidence was damning. Transfers, falsified invoices, signatures that weren't hers but bore her name. If the authorities see this... Clara's voice caught. Daniel nodded grimly. Richard could lose everything. His company, his freedom. I tried to stop it, but no one believed me. They all feared him. But you have the power to expose him. You're his wife. Your testimony, combined with this, could end it. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, overwhelmed. She had come seeking answers, and now she held the weapon that could destroy Richard's entire world. That evening, Clara sat once more in the penthouse, the folder on her lap. Richard entered close to midnight, reeking of alcohol, his tie loose around his neck. He barely glanced at her as he poured himself a drink. You're still up? He muttered. Clara studied him quietly. For the first time, she didn't see the man she had married. She saw the arrogance, the decay, the selfishness that had always been there, now laid bare. I met someone today, she said softly. Richard looked up, suspicious. What do you mean? A former employee of the foundation. He showed me where the money has been going. Shell companies, Sabrina's apartment, cars, jewelry. The glass in Richard's hand trembled slightly. You don't know what you're talking about. Clara opened the folder and spread the papers across the table. Don't I? Richard's face darkened. He slammed the glass down, his voice sharp. Where did you get this? Who gave it to you? Clara's eyes never wavered. Does it matter? The truth is here, and I'm done protecting you. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then Richard laughed bitterly. You think anyone will believe you? You've been hiding in this penthouse, too weak to even step outside. You're nothing without me, Clara. Nothing. Clara felt her hands tremble, but she steadied them against the table. She thought of Alexander's words. You already are strong. She thought of her father. She thought of her child. I may be nothing to you, she said, her voice steady, but I am everything to my child, and I won't let you steal from us any longer. The next day, Clara made her move. She met privately with her attorney, handing over both the bank statements and Daniel's documents. The attorney's eyes widened. Clara, this is enough to open a full investigation. Are you ready for that? Clara nodded. I don't want to destroy him out of spite. I want to protect my baby. I want what is mine. Her attorney placed a reassuring hand on hers. Then that's exactly what we'll do. Quietly, strategically, he won't see it coming. And so it began. Letters were drafted, accounts were frozen. The silent counterattack took shape not in shouting or confrontation, but in quiet, deliberate steps that Richard would only recognize when it was too late. At night, Clara walked through the penthouse, no longer feeling like a prisoner. Each document signed, each call made was a thread cut from the net Richard had tried to trap her in. When he texted her curtly, "Stay out of my way," she didn't respond. When he stumbled home, demanding dinner, demanding her silence, she simply observed him, her mind already 10 steps ahead. And when he noticed the shift in her eyes, the calm defiance, he frowned. "What are you planning, Clara?" She only smiled faintly. "You'll see." One evening, as she prepared tea in the kitchen, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Alexander. "I hear you've started moving quietly. Good. Just remember, you don't have to do this alone." Clara's lips trembled into the faintest smile. She typed back, her fingers steady. "Thank you, but this time it has to be on my terms." She set the phone down, lifting her cup to her lips. The tea was warm, soothing. For the first time in months, she tasted strength. The counterattack had begun, not with noise, not with fury, but with silence sharper than any blade. And Richard Donovan, so certain of his control, had no idea that the woman he had dismissed as weak was already dismantling him. Piece by piece. The winter wind howled across the private runway, carrying with it the low roar of jet engines preparing for departure. Clara Donovan stood at the edge of the tarmac, her coat pulled tightly around her swollen belly, her clutch clutched firmly in her hands. The night was cold, but her resolve burned hotter than ever. For weeks, she had prepared silently, gathering documents, freezing accounts, meeting with lawyers in secret. The silent counterattack had cut deep, but tonight was different. Tonight would not be silent. Tonight would be final. The sleek jet waited behind her, its door open, a steward standing by. The invitation had not come from Richard but from Alexander Graves, who had quietly arranged the flight. "You don't have to stay in that prison anymore," he had told her. "Leave on your terms." And she would. But not before ending this charade once and for all. Headlights pierced the darkness. A black luxury car pulled up near the runway. Clara's heart pounded, but her face remained calm as Richard Donovan stepped out, Sabrina Cole clinging to his arm. Richard's expression was a mixture of arrogance and irritation. He was dressed sharply, but the smirk he wore faltered slightly when he saw Clara standing there, poised, unshaken. Sabrina, however, radiated smug triumph, her crimson lips curving as she pressed closer to Richard. "Well, well," Richard drawled, his voice thick with condescension. "What are you doing here, Clara? This isn't your scene." Clara said nothing. She only lifted her chin, her gaze cold and steady. Sabrina laughed lightly, her voice dripping with mockery. "Honestly, Clara, you should have stayed home. Look at you, trying to play strong, but everyone knows Richard has moved on." Clara's fingers tightened around the envelope in her hand. Slowly, deliberately, she stepped forward and extended it toward Richard. "This," she said quietly, her voice carrying in the cold air, "is the last thing you'll ever get from me." Richard frowned, taking the envelope. He tore it open, pulling out the papers inside. His eyes scanned the words, and for the first time, his confidence cracked. Divorce. Signed, sealed. Irrevocable. His face paled. You're divorcing me?" Clara's gaze didn't waver. "You thought I was weak. You thought I would tolerate everything, the lies, the affair, the theft. But you were wrong. I am finished with you, Richard." The silence that followed was broken only by the rumble of the jet engines. Sabrina blinked, confusion flashing across her face before she forced a laugh. "So what? You think leaving him is some kind of victory? He doesn't need you. He has me." Clara turned her eyes toward Sabrina, her tone sharp but calm. "You think being paraded around is love? You think a man who betrays his wife and child will ever be loyal to you? Enjoy the scraps he throws at you, Sabrina. They won't last." Sabrina's smile faltered, but before she could respond, Richard's voice rose, desperate and angry. "You can't do this. You think you'll survive without me? You're nothing without me, Clara." Clara's lips curved into the faintest smile. "I already have survived without you, and I will thrive. You just don't realize it yet." The steward at the jet door motioned gently. Clara stepped forward, her heels clicking against the pavement. Each step was a declaration. She was no longer the woman who waited by the window for a man who never came home. She was no longer the woman who swallowed humiliation in silence. She was free. But behind her, Sabrina's voice rose, sharp and shrill. "Richard, you're not going to just let her walk away, are you? Do something. Stop her." Richard stood frozen, the divorce papers trembling in his hand. For once, he had no words, no power. Clara climbed the stairs slowly, her hand brushing her belly, her strength radiating in every movement. At the top, she paused and looked back one final time. Richard's face was ashen, his mouth parted in shock. Sabrina was clinging to him, but her eyes darted with panic. Around them, the runway lights gleamed like witnesses to their downfall. "You made your choice, Richard," Clara said firmly, her voice steady against the wind. "Now I've made mine." She turned and stepped inside the jet. The door closed behind her with a soft, final thud. Inside, warmth enveloped her, the hum of luxury engines steady and strong. Alexander Graves sat near the window, rising as she entered. He didn't smile triumphantly. He didn't gloat. He simply inclined his head, as though acknowledging her victory. "You did it," he said quietly. Clara sank into the leather seat, exhaustion and relief washing over her. "No," she whispered, resting her hand on her belly. "We did it." Through the window, she caught one last glimpse of the runway. Sabrina was on her knees, pleading, her voice lost in the roar of the engines. Richard stood stiff, his face pale, clutching the divorce papers that sealed his downfall. The jet engines roared louder, drowning out the chaos outside. The plane began to move, carrying Clara away from the life that had once trapped her. As the city lights disappeared beneath her, Clara closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time, Her heart felt lighter. The betrayal had nearly broken her, the humiliation had scarred her. But the runway had given her something new. Release. She wasn't just leaving Richard, she was leaving behind the woman who had once believed she couldn't survive without him. Now she was someone else, stronger, wiser, free. And while Richard's empire crumbled under the weight of his own corruption, Clara's new life was just beginning. On her terms, with her dignity intact, and with her child's future secured. The morning after Clara's departure spread across the headlines like wildfire. Newspapers and gossip sites screamed the story. Philanthropist Richard Donovan served divorce papers at private jet runway. Pictures of him clutching the envelope, his face pale with shock, circulated online. And right beside him, Sabrina Cole, visibly distraught, her glamour stripped away under the unforgiving flash of cameras. For years, Richard had commanded respect. He was the man who hosted galas, signed million-dollar deals, and strutted into boardrooms with arrogance. Now, all anyone could see was a husband exposed, abandoned, his mistress caught in the glare of public shame. Inside the Donovan Corporation offices, chaos brewed. Board members convened emergency meetings, whispers of financial misconduct spilling through the halls. Clara's attorneys had moved swiftly, freezing accounts tied to her inheritance. At the same time, Daniel Reed's documents began circulating among the board. It was undeniable. Funds had been misused, and Richard's fingerprints were all over the evidence. Richard stormed into the boardroom that afternoon, his temper barely restrained. "This is nonsense," he barked, slamming his fist against the table. "Those documents are fabricated, lies spread by people jealous of my success." The chairman, a man Richard had once considered an ally, looked at him coldly. "Enough, Richard. The evidence is overwhelming. Millions diverted into shell accounts. Expenses under Sabrina Cole's name marked as business development. Do you take us for fools?" Richard's face flushed red. He glanced around the room, searching for support, but found only grim expressions. Whispers he had once ignored were now knives pointed in his direction. "You're suspended, effective immediately," the chairman declared. "Pending investigation. The Donovan Corporation cannot afford to sink with you." The words struck like a hammer. Richard, once untouchable, felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. At the penthouse, Sabrina paced nervously, her manicured nails biting into her palms. When Richard returned, his face stormy, she rushed to him. "What's happening? Tell me they can't touch you," she demanded. Richard poured himself a drink with shaking hands. "They've turned on me. The board, the donors, they're all against me now. Clara, she planned this." The mention of Clara's name made Sabrina's lips curl in disdain. "So you're saying your pregnant wife outsmarted you?" she hissed. "Maybe you're not as powerful as you think." Richard's eyes blazed. "Watch your mouth." But Sabrina wasn't intimidated anymore. The glamour of being his mistress was fading fast. The lavish gifts had slowed, the financial safety net slipping through her fingers. She thought she had secured a future, but now she saw the truth. Richard was crumbling, and he had nothing left to offer. "I didn't sign up for this," she snapped. "I won't be dragged down with you." Richard froze, his glass halfway to his lips. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm done." She grabbed her purse, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "Find someone else to worship you. I'm not going down with a sinking ship." And with that, she was gone. Richard stood in the silent penthouse, the weight of the divorce papers heavy in his mind, the echo of Sabrina's footsteps still ringing in his ears. For years he had believed he could control everything, his business, his marriage, his mistress, his image. Now all of it was gone, slipping through his fingers like sand. He poured another drink, but it did nothing to numb the fear gnawing at him. For the first time in his life, Richard Donovan was truly alone. Meanwhile, across the city, Clara sat in Alexander Graves's office, the warm glow of sunlight streaming through tall windows. She cradled a cup of tea, her eyes fixed on the skyline. "You've made headlines," Alexander remarked, his voice calm but edged with admiration. "The way you handled it, quiet, decisive, unflinching. He never saw it coming." Clara smiled faintly, though her eyes were tired. "For so long I let him control the narrative. I thought silence was weakness, but silence, it became my weapon." Alexander leaned forward, his gaze steady. "You've taken back everything he stole from you, and more importantly, you've proven something to yourself, that you are not defined by him. You never were. Clara placed her hand on her belly, feeling the gentle kick of her child. I did it for us, for this life inside me. I couldn't let him drag us down with him. Her voice trembled, but her resolve was clear. She wasn't celebrating revenge, she was claiming survival. News of Richard's downfall spread beyond New York. Donors pulled out of projects, regulators announced formal investigations. Reporters hounded him at every turn, their questions merciless. Mr. Donovan, did you use foundation money to fund your mistress's lifestyle? Have you been served divorce papers by your wife? Will you resign permanently? Each question chipped away at the image he had crafted. Each headline pushed him further into disgrace. One evening, Richard sat alone in a dimly lit bar, staring into his glass. The televisions above the counter replayed footage of Clara boarding the jet, calm and composed, while Sabrina begged at the runway. The contrast was brutal. Clara, dignified in her departure. Richard, humiliated in his desperation. The bartender leaned closer. Rough week, huh? Richard didn't answer. He only lowered his head, the divorce papers still haunting him. Across the ocean, in the warmth of a foreign villa Alexander had arranged, Clara walked barefoot along a sunlit terrace. She wore a simple dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. The air smelled of the sea, fresh and free. She paused, resting her hand against her belly. We're safe now, she whispered to her unborn child. No more lies, no more pain, just us, and a new beginning. Alexander joined her on the terrace, offering a gentle smile. You've come a long way, Clara. Don't forget to breathe. The storm is behind you. Clara exhaled, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in months. She knew there were still battles ahead. Legal fights, custody discussions, endless headlines, but none of it mattered as much as this moment. She had walked away with her dignity, her child, and the strength she once thought she'd lost. And Richard? He was left with the bitter end, an empty penthouse, a ruined reputation, and the knowledge that the woman he dismissed as fragile had been the one to end him. The soft crash of waves filled the villa as dawn stretched across the horizon. Clara Donovan sat on the balcony, wrapped in a light shawl, watching the sunlight break across the ocean. The air was different here, warm, fresh, free of the heavy weight she had carried for so long. For the first time in months, her body felt at ease and her soul lighter. Her hands rested on her rounded belly, the steady rhythm of her baby's kicks grounding her. We made it, she whispered, a faint smile tugging at her lips. We're really free now. The words felt almost foreign. Freedom. She had dreamed of it in the darkest nights, when Richard's betrayal crushed her, when Sabrina's smirk haunted her. And now, it wasn't a dream, it was reality. Back in New York, the fallout from Richard's downfall continued to unfold. Investigations exposed years of corruption, his empire collapsing brick by brick. Board members distanced themselves, donors fled, and Sabrina vanished from the headlines, abandoning the man she once clung to. But Clara didn't watch the news anymore. She didn't need to. Richard's story was no longer hers to carry. She had walked away, closed the chapter, and chosen not revenge, but life. In the villa, Alexander Graves arrived with his usual quiet presence, setting a tray of breakfast on the table. You're awake early, he observed. Clara turned, her smile small but genuine. The baby doesn't let me sleep much these days. Alexander's eyes softened, but he didn't press further. He poured her tea, the steam curling into the morning air. You look different, Clara, lighter, stronger. She exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting back toward the sea. For so long, I thought strength meant staying, enduring, forgiving, but real strength was walking away. Alexander nodded, his voice low. And you did it with dignity. That's rare. Her throat tightened. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to destroy him. I just couldn't let him destroy me or our child. The silence between them was steady, not heavy. For once, silence wasn't loneliness, it was peace. That afternoon, Clara walked through the villa gardens, the flowers swaying gently in the breeze. She remembered her father's words long ago. Dignity is the armor no one can take from you. She had nearly forgotten those words in the haze of betrayal, but now they echoed louder than ever. Each step on the garden path felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. She wasn't just Richard's discarded wife, nor Sabrina's victim. She was Clara Donovan, mother, daughter, survivor. She paused beneath a sprawling tree, pressing a hand to her belly again. I'll teach you strength, she whispered, but also kindness, because both matter. A week later, Clara's attorney called. The divorce proceedings are finalized. Custody is solely yours. The court accepted the financial evidence. Richard won't have access to your inheritance or the foundation again. It's over. Clara closed her eyes, her chest rising with a deep, shuddering breath. Thank you, she whispered. As she hung up, tears slipped down her cheeks. Not tears of sorrow, but of release. The chains were gone. The fight was over. And in their place was something she hadn't felt in a long time: relief. That evening, Alexander joined her on the terrace again. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Divorce finalized? He asked. Clara nodded, her eyes glistening. It's done, completely. Alexander studied her for a moment, then said, So what comes next? Clara looked out at the horizon. For months, her entire life had been consumed with Richard, his betrayals, his lies, his downfall. But now, for the first time, the future stretched wide open, unclaimed. I don't know yet, she admitted softly, but whatever it is, it will be mine. Not his. Not anyone else's, just mine. Alexander smiled faintly, raising his glass of wine. To new beginnings. Clara lifted her own glass of water, the corners of her lips curving upward. To freedom. Later that night, Clara wrote in her journal, a habit she had once abandoned, but now returned to. Her words flowed freely, pouring out everything she had kept bottled inside. I thought I was broken. I thought betrayal defined me, but I was wrong. The betrayal freed me. It forced me to see who I truly am. I am stronger than the silence, braver than the pain, and worth more than his lies. My story doesn't end with him. It begins with me. She closed the journal, placing it gently on the nightstand. Her heart felt calm, steady. Across the city, Richard sat in the darkened ruins of his penthouse, his phone buzzing with unanswered calls. Sabrina was gone. The board had turned against him, and the world had stripped him of everything he once valued. In his hands still lay the divorce papers Clara had given him, the ink bold and final. He thought of her, boarding the jet without hesitation, her head held high. That image haunted him more than anything, the quiet dignity of a woman he had underestimated until it was too late. For Richard, the end had come bitter and cold. But for Clara, it was the beginning of something far greater. The next morning, Clara awoke to the sound of waves and birdsong. She stretched slowly, savoring the simple joy of peace. As she stepped onto the balcony, the sun bathed her in warmth. She whispered to her unborn child, We're going to be okay. Better than okay. We're going to live. Her hand rested on her belly, and for the first time, she felt not fear, but hope. Clara Donovan had been betrayed, humiliated, discarded. But she had risen. She had walked away with her dignity intact, her child safe, and her future wide open. And in that moment, with the sea stretching endlessly before her, she knew. Her story was no longer one of pain, but of healing. Her past had ended on a runway, beneath flashing lights and cold winds. Her future began here in the light of dawn, free, whole, and unafraid. The world had not been kind to Sabrina Cole after the runway incident. The photos of her begging at Richard Donovan's side had gone viral, replayed across every gossip site and morning talk show. The mistress who once flaunted her beauty and glamour was now a meme, mocked and pitied in equal measure. The life she had clawed for, expensive gowns, luxury cars, VIP parties, vanished within weeks. The apartment Richard paid for was seized, the car repossessed. Lawyers refused her calls, afraid of being tied to the Donovan scandal. Even her so-called friends deleted her number. For the first time, Sabrina felt what Clara had endured for months: silence. But unlike Clara, Sabrina had no dignity to hold on to, no inner strength to anchor her. And the cruelest irony? Richard, the man she had gambled everything on, turned against her too. You're part of this mess, he snarled during one of their last fights. Half the payments are in your name. If I go down, you'll burn with me. That was the night Sabrina left, her heels clicking out of his penthouse forever. She carried nothing but her purse and the haunting knowledge that she had lost everything she thought she had won. Meanwhile, Clara Donovan's life could not have been more different. In the warmth of Alexander Graves's villa, she cradled her unborn child and breathed in freedom. For the first time in months, she slept without fear. The divorce was finalized. Her dignity was intact, her inheritance secured. And Richard? He was left with empty accounts, an empty penthouse, and an empty life. One evening, as the sun dipped into the sea, Clara stood on the terrace, a glass of water in hand. Alexander joined her quietly, setting his drink on the railing beside hers. "You know," he said softly, "in every story like this, the mistress thinks she's won. But she never does. She always ends up more broken than the wife she mocked." Clara exhaled slowly. "I don't feel triumphant. I don't need to. Knowing she paid her own price, that's enough." Alexander studied her for a moment, the glow of sunset reflecting in his eyes. "That's what makes you different, Clara. You didn't fight for revenge. You fought for freedom. That's why you won." She smiled faintly, her hand resting on her belly. "I didn't win for me. I won for us." Across the ocean, Sabrina's name faded from the tabloids, her beauty no longer enough to hold attention. She drifted into obscurity, her fall serving as a warning whispered at dinner parties. Don't be like her. Don't mistake destruction for victory. And that was the true ending of Sabrina Cole, the woman who once smirked at Clara's pain. But for Clara, her story was just beginning. Weeks later, she welcomed a healthy baby boy into the world. Tears filled her eyes as she held him against her chest, whispering, "You'll never know neglect. You'll only know love." Alexander was there, not in the delivery room, but waiting outside, a steady presence she had come to trust. When the nurse placed her son in her arms, Alexander stepped closer, his voice low and respectful. "He's strong," he said, "just like his mother." Clara looked up at him, her eyes tired but shining. "Thank you for being here." Alexander shook his head. "You don't owe me thanks. I'm honored just to witness this new beginning." In the months that followed, Clara built a life of peace. She focused on motherhood, on rediscovering who she was without Richard's shadow. And Alexander never pressured, never rushed. He was simply there, an ally, a friend, a man who understood the value of dignity. But sometimes, in the quiet evenings when the baby slept and the sea sang softly outside, Clara would catch his gaze lingering just a little longer. And for the first time, she didn't fear the possibility of love again. She wasn't ready yet, but one day maybe, because Clara's story was no longer one of betrayal, humiliation, and loss. It was a story of healing, of dignity, of strength, and perhaps one day, of love. Sometimes in life, the greatest strength isn't in holding on, it's in knowing when to let go. Clara's journey shows us that dignity is more powerful than revenge, and healing is more valuable than any victory. Betrayal may leave scars, but it can also open the door to freedom and self-respect. As Marcus Aurelius once said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. So what about you? Have you ever faced a moment where walking away made you stronger? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if this journey touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next story. Together, let's keep building a community of resilience, healing, and hope.